Hi, my name is Kara Pike, Executive Director of Climate Access, and I'm excited to share with you today the Community Climate Leaders Program. Climate Access is a nonprofit focused on climate activation via effective communication and engagement strategies. We've been working with local governments and states for the past 7 years to engage community members in climate planning and in taking steps in their own lives. And what we really focus on is the public as partners. And what that means is co-generating and implementing climate plans and solutions. So for example, in California, we work with a number of local governments to engage people through a program called Look Ahead that leverage virtual reality to walk people through risks and solutions to sea level rise and allow them to weigh in. And we also have worked with Louisville Metro government, state of Vermont, engaging community members in their climate action plans with a major focus on flooding risks. Today, we're going to focus on Community Climate Leaders, which is a program that's activating people to take steps to cut climate pollution and prepare for impacts by generating partnerships between local governments and trusted community organizations and influencers. I'm going to share the overall program elements and then some examples from Boston and Vancouver, British Columbia, where there have been pilots done to date. So it all started with Boston, and initially they asked Climate Access to help them come up with a strategy for sharing out the Climate Ready Boston Vulnerability Assessment, with a big focus on sea level rise, flooding, and heat impacts. We engaged in a conversation with the city about how sharing out the assessment really wasn't enough. People are already quite worried about risks. So, what is it that people can do? What is the ask? We looked at a number of peer-based outreach models from other communities around the United States and talked to more than 50 community leaders in Boston from a whole range of sectors to get insights on what would work best to raise awareness of risk, but also activate folks to take action. And what we heard was don't helicopter in. Provide people with organizations and provide organizations with tools and resources to support them to engage with the networks that they're already connected with. So this really informed the design of what would become Greenovate Community Leaders. And that pilot ran, and then we helped evaluate it. And in its redesign, it went from a focus on adaptation to really including steps to cut climate pollution as well. I've been working in Vancouver, British Columbia. The pilot there is just wrapping up now and about to launch a program with Cambridge, Massachusetts, as well as Richmond, British Columbia. So as mentioned, this is really about the public as partners. And what these programs are aiming to do is increase awareness of climate impacts as well as solutions. What we're finding that people really do care, but aren't quite clear, how does this really affect me? And what are the steps my community is taking? And what are the steps I can take as well? Another key element is incorporating community concerns and ideas for solutions into climate action plans and programs so that they do reflect what people are facing in their lives, their ideas, and really incorporating that local knowledge. And a real focus on reaching those who are most impacted by climate change as well as an energy transition. And also, finally, as mentioned, to spark climate action in keeping with local government's climate action plans. So, a couple of key elements to the program is co designing the program with trusted community leaders, that input that was mentioned in the Boston example. And there's so many people that care about this issue already. So really connecting with them and increasing their capacity to lead in the community on this issue. Really focusing on making the topic of climate change personal. It's often presented as a scientific challenge, an expert challenge, a global challenge. But really, what does this mean for my community, for me and my family, and things that I care about, which is really important for connecting around people's values. Promoting peer-to-peer outreach and processing. So, really tapping into those trusted community influencers, organizations, but also giving people an opportunity to work through the issues together. What we know is that it works much better when you set up processes where people can co-explore risks and co-create solutions rather than having things be dictated. It's also important in terms of reducing polarization, as well as helping people move through all of the emotions related to accepting this issue and really working through what it means. Providing resources and support for activation. It's not that easy to really figure out what it is I can do that's most impactful. And so, really making action pathways clear and accessible, and then following up. So the community leaders who are trained and are reaching out to their networks are also going to follow up after the dialogue events that they host in order to see what participants thought, how they might help them implement action steps. So through these programs, the leaders are getting training, they're getting toolkits, they're getting peer support, support from the city to really best engage their networks in co-exploring those risks and solutions, adding their ideas to what local governments are doing, and working on their own climate action plans in keeping with those city goals. And some of the things that really make it work is taking all that information and embedding it into storytelling. So the community climate leaders who sign up for the program are really making it personal, their own experience, why they care about it, changes they've seen, steps that they've taken. And that really helps others make the issue more accessible, see themselves in it. A key program element is ensuring there are stipends for those who sign up and are trained to be leaders to do the outreach in their community so that it's a reciprocal relationship. There's a whole toolkit created for the community leaders that includes dialogue and event planning, how to move people through climate risks, what the city is doing, the steps they can take, and into that action planning step. There's feedback materials, there's information on climate impacts, what the city is doing, and action toolkits that really map out the steps that people can take, going from things that are relatively easy to do up to bigger things, to recognize that people are at all different stages in their journey with this issue and how they can engage. There's a leader training. So the leaders receive a general training and then in-depth sessions as requested by the group as to what would be most helpful. Provided coaching throughout so they can contact the person leading the program with the local government and get support, as well as connect with the other leaders to find out how did you organize your outreach and your dialogue and action planning event. What worked? What didn't? So that peer sharing and bringing people together for celebrations to really mark what the leaders accomplish. So here's an example from the City of Boston's program, and this is just one of the action areas around a prepared city that's prepared for the climate impacts on their way. So it really maps out a set of clear actions that can be taken, making it much more accessible for people. So the overall program phases starts with that design, the co-creation, and that's where Climate Access is really working closely with local governments to help get that input and shape the program so it's most relevant for their contacts and the impacts being experienced, the solutions most applicable, and the composition of the community. Toolkits are developed in a very customized way, training as well, designed. And then once the leaders go through the training, they go into event planning. and then hosting their events, and then following up with those who attended. In most cases, people are reaching out to their own social networks. In some of the pilot projects, people opened it up to be a much more public event to see who else they could bring in. So there's a lot of variations in terms of how those events come together. And that's part of the keys to the success is the leaders really owning it and shaping it for what will work for their context. That follow-up post-event, and then we're providing support throughout and then coming back in to really help evaluate the program. And at the end, bringing the leaders back together to share insights and celebrate accomplishments. So let me just give some examples of the outcomes from Boston. In the first phase of the pilot, they had 140 community members trained from a broad range of sectors, including nonprofit organizations, businesses, people who were engaging via their church groups, community organizations, schools, neighborhood associations. Those leaders went on to host more than 75 dialogues, and engaged more than 1,300 Bostonians. And the dialogue length was 2 hours on average, so quite a deep dive into the issues. And I'll share some examples later of the actions that came out of that. For the city of Vancouver, the program was being designed during the height of the first wave of the pandemic. So, a very different experience, and also had to be redesigned to be online only, which really did result in some different outcomes. In Vancouver, the goals were more or less the same as in Boston, really looking to tap into people who wanted to act, build local leadership and capacity. But in the case of Vancouver, not just thinking about how to prepare for impacts and cut climate pollution, but also increase overall community resilience. So, can this program really connect people together? And as mentioned, this was happening at the height of the first wave of the pandemic. So things took much longer. We couldn't do things in person, but we still managed to interview more than 35 community leaders representing a broad range of segments of the community in Vancouver. And what was really interesting is despite the concerns about health and the economy, is there is a real urgency around climate change and people seeing the connections across the issues and feeling that we could no longer wait to act. In Vancouver, the action pathways were expanded to really be clear. What is it that you can do as an individual? What is it you can do as a community? And what is it you can do civically? And there was a piece around uh, weighing in on what the city is doing, which was consistent with Boston. But this went on to include advocacy, steps that community members could take in order to influence other levels of government around issues that were holding the city back. So, because of COVID, expectations around the cohort site was greatly scaled back. And in total, we had 25 people who attended the training, which was held online over. We had to split up the group just to provide options in terms of different days and times. And those community leaders have gone on to organize at least 16 events. So this hasn't wrapped up yet. And I can't, as a result, give you the total number of participants because we still have a number of events coming up. But be excited to circle back and see those outcomes. What we do know from Vancouver, and this was true with Boston as well, when we talked with the leaders, and in the case of Boston, had the chance of connecting with some of the participants as well, which we'll do in Vancouver when we move to evaluation. But a real sense of efficacy and hope. Um, really creating a community of activators. So people feeling really happy to find other folks who care as much. Um, Building an understanding of what the city is doing and the solutions available, and the city seeing the depth of engagement as really critical. So, looking across the programs, some of the key outcomes to date is really increased awareness of impacts, what the city is doing, and steps that can be taken. And this is important because we find there's a whole new group of people out there who aren't necessarily going to connect with advocacy organizations, but are really worried about climate change, sea level rise, flooding, and other impacts, and what they can do. And they really want to know what it is their local government is doing and how they can connect in. We're seeing some great examples from the dialogues of that local knowledge and feedback from community members being incorporated into city planning. So, for example, in Boston, across the dialogues, participants said again and again they were worried about extreme heat, and so the sustainability team joined forces with the public health department to create an extreme heat education and alert system. What we've heard from the leaders and participants is strong relationships with city staff, really appreciating that they have someone that they know that can really help make what it is local governments are doing more accessible, and that they feel part of it. And especially some of the younger folks who participated felt it was a great experience for learning if they would want to work in local government. It did increase climate action. Again, we don't know the outcomes yet from Vancouver because those dialogues are still underway. But for Boston, there were examples such as some of the younger folks who were leaders getting their peers to engage in zero waste activities. There was a senior in Boston who organized a contact list to alert other seniors, make sure everyone was okay during extreme weather events, and that person used their stipend to help folks buy backup medical supplies. So we are reaching those most impacted through the program. I think that social capital, that connectivity of people coming together, finding others who care, sharing with each other. What we really see in this program, but other work we do on climate activation, people don't want to go it alone. They really want to work with others and ultimately try and do something on scale, and establishing new social norms. There are people like me who care about this. One of the things in Boston that was really key was the program uh, toolkit being translated into four other languages that are dominant in the city, so that leaders could really run with it and do it in their own language as well. So really, that personal normalizing the conversation, normalizing the action is really critical. Those are some of the key outcomes that we're seeing to date with the Community Climate Leaders Program. We're very excited to have had the opportunity to present this at the Social Coast Forum and look forward to continuing the conversation as programs roll out in other parts of Canada and the United States. Thank you very much.